The subcommittee will come to order. At the conclusion of opening statements yesterday, the chair called up H.R. 3299, and the bill was open for amendment at any point. Are there any bipartisan amendments to the bill?
Mr. Chairman?
Are there? Yes.
To strike the last word.
Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Indiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd also like to recognize gentleman for his upcoming amendment. I realize I jumped the gun here maybe and should have allowed him to introduce his amendment.
All right.
I yield back.
Are there any other amendments? Chair recognizes Mr. Butterfield to offer an amendment.
Thank you, Chairman Pitts. I do have an amendment at the desk, and I thank the gentlelady for her courtesy.
The clerk, you have the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 3299 offered by Mr. Butterfield.
Chair recognizes Mr. Butterfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, let me just speak very briefly in support of my amendment to improve our nation's ability to combat public health threats by strengthening the FDA Tropical Disease Priority Review Voucher Program. We call it the PRV program. There is no mission more important to our constituents than national security. As our global society becomes more interconnected, the levels of risk increase exponentially. Research and development from medical experts in government and in the private sector are what protect us from public health threats. Diseases like Ebola and Zika are threats to all of humanity. It is important to do our part to help our brothers and sisters around the world fight these illnesses. The FDA Tropical Disease Program is a key tool in that fight. It encourages the development of treatment for dangerous diseases by prioritizing their review at the FDA. In April, President Obama signed into law a version of my legislation, H.R. 4400, which added the Zika virus to the Tropical Disease Program. Today's bill, offered by Ms. Brooks and Ms. Eshoo, will add certain diseases which are national security threats to the PRV program. My amendment, Mr. Chairman, strengthens the program. It strengthens the program by reducing the chances of abuse and reforming the program to help it accomplish its mission. Specifically, our amendment ensures that drugs qualifying for the PRV are new drugs and confirms that they will be used by people in countries plagued with tropical diseases. My amendment preserves the value of a voucher by guaranteeing that the program is only used for its intended purpose. My amendment will also help inform our strategy to combat diseases in the future. The amendment will result in the sharing of information about the demands for treatment of tropical diseases and help better understand the areas of unmet need. It also mandates a GAO study to examine the effectiveness of the Tropical Disease Program. And so I thank the two members who have sponsored the legislation. I thank all of them for their bipartisan spirit and for this bipartisan bill to improve national security and reduce the threat posed by harmful diseases. The amendment is a step in the right direction. The amendment is also a step forward for PRV programs, but there is still much to be done to improve these programs at the FDA to combat public health threats, including making the pediatric PRV program permanent. It is my hope that this amendment spurs the dialogue on how to improve all of the tools at FDA's disposal to reduce all public health threats. I urge my colleagues to support this important amendment, and I thank the sponsors, and I yield back.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. Is there a discussion on the Butterfield amendment? Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Indiana, Ms. Brooks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I seek to strike the last word. I'd like to thank the gentleman for his amendment. I'd also like to thank the gentleman for our previous work involving the Zika virus and adding it to the PRV list. I'd like to submit for the record a letter from the American Hospital Association that recognizes the crucial role that a strong emergency preparedness enterprise has in keeping our communities safe.
Without objections, ordered.
Throughout this nearly year-long consideration of H.R. 3299, it's remained a top priority to ensure that we understand the incredibly unique role medical countermeasures have and how they differ from any commercial vaccine or therapeutic that goes through the FDA approval process. From beginning to end, the challenges faced by companies in this space differ from any commercial drug that goes through the typical FDA approval pathway, and it's imperative that we do not lose sight of this fact. Medical countermeasures research on these deadly pathogens is a high-risk endeavor, and it's complicated by the fact that any vaccine or therapeutic cannot be tested in humans. These companies who operate in this space do not operate in a vacuum, and the reality is that there must be incentives in place for which the government is the sole provider. Without true incentives in place to develop medical countermeasures, such as a timely and reliable contracting process within BARDA, and allowing material threats to be eligible for a priority review voucher, we weaken rather than strengthen our underlying national security enterprise and are at real risk losing our private sector's partners in this space. These particular incentives are in the underlying bill, and it does remain a top priority to maintain the integrity of this process and these programs. I truly appreciate the hard work by both the majority and the minority staffs on the committee, as well as the many industry stakeholders, BARDA and the FDA, who have all offered their expertise. We've continued to meet throughout this process. I'm pleased to say we've accommodated many requests, and I appreciate the gentleman's amendment. And of course, like the gentleman, want to strengthen the PRV process. I understand there remain some industry issues in the language in the amendment as potentially being too onerous, but we do look forward to working through those difficult issues, and I believe that we can look forward, and I will encourage support and look forward to supporting final passage of this bill and encourage our staffs to continue to work through this amendment language. With that, I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentlelady. Is there further discussion on the
Mr. Chairman.
Chair recognizes Mr. Plone, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just, again, want to thank colleagues and sponsors of H.R. 3299, Ms. Brooks and Ms. Eshu, and the chairman for their commitment to improving our ability to respond to biological threats and for the willingness to work through concerns that have been raised related to the BARDA contracting process and the need for a new incentive to develop medical countermeasures through expanding the use of priority review vouchers. The amendment offered today by Mr. Butterfield reflects the bipartisan discussions to try and address these concerns, and I appreciate that it is a step forward in addressing these issues. I continue to have concerns with the change being made to the BARDA's transaction authorities. I'm concerned the change will inject undue influence into the contracting process and potentially slow down the process. And I continue to have concerns about expanding a permanent priority review voucher program without evidence that the program works. It still has not been demonstrated to date that the tropical disease PRV program is incentivizing manufacturers to invest in new drug research and development. Further, we've also heard from the administration and from numerous other stakeholders about significant issues with the current program, and I'm reluctant for further expand the program without addressing those underlying problems. Under current law, there's no requirement that sponsors invest in new research to receive a priority review voucher. Of the 3 PRVs awarded under the tropical disease PRV program, 2 were to companies for drugs that were available for years outside the United States. In one case, the drug was approved in over 80 countries before the sponsor filed an application with FDA, and that application included only studies the sponsor conducted before 2007 to receive approval elsewhere. However, under the terms of the current program, FDA was forced to reward this sponsor. Recently, a PRV sold for $350 million, and I want to make sure that only sponsors who are investing in new drug research and development receive such a valuable benefit. A PRV should be an incentive to investing in new public health solutions, not a windfall to companies that do not. Another significant issue with the existing tropical disease PRV program is that it does not ensure patients, government entities, and healthcare providers can access approved products. Unlike the pediatric rare disease PRV program, there's no requirement that a company market a product approved to prevent or treat a tropical disease. International organizations such as Doctors Without Borders, the TB Alliance, Drugs for Neglected Disease Initiative, the American Thoracic Society, among others, have reported that it is challenging and sometimes impossible to access drugs approved under FDA's tropical disease PRV program. There's also no transparency in the current program to help us learn if and how a sponsor will make its drug available to those who we intended the program to help. The Butterfield Amendment is the first step in trying to address these two issues. First, it would include a novelty requirement such as sponsors would not receive a PRV if the tropical disease product had been approved previously in another country, or if the sponsor did not conduct new phase 3 clinical studies to support approval of the product by the FDA. This limitation will help to ensure that we're rewarding companies who are truly investing in new R&D of products needed to treat those suffering from tropical diseases. And second, the Butterfield Amendment also would require that sponsors make publicly available a product strategy plan describing how the tropical disease product will be made available in countries where the tropical disease involved is endemic. This requirement will provide greater transparency into how a sponsor intends to make the tropical disease product available following approval, as well as ensure that sponsors are taking into consideration the need to make such product available where it's needed the most. While I still have concerns with the existing tropical disease priority review voucher program and reservations about expanding the definition of tropical disease to include material threats, I do thank the chairman for his commitment to working together to find bipartisan solutions to the issues that I have raised, and I look forward to working with the chairman, the bill's sponsors, Ms. Brooks and Ms. Eshu, and the rest of the subcommittee to continue to address these issues before the full committee markup takes place. And so I would urge my colleagues to vote in support of Mr. Butterfield's amendment. Thank you. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Chair, thanks. The gentleman, is there further discussion on the Butterfield Amendment? If there's no further discussion, I understand we've agreed to support this amendment. The vote now occurs on the amendment. All those in favor shall signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Question now occurs on forwarding H.R. 3299 as amended to the full committee. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes have it, and the bill is agreed to. The chair now calls up H.R. 921 and asks the clerk to report.
H.R. 921, to provide protection for certain sport medicine professionals.
Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with, and the bill will be open for amendment at any point. So ordered. The chair now recognizes Mr. Guthrie for the purpose of offering an amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 921, offered by Mr. Guthrie.
Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with. Mr. Guthrie is recognized for 5 minutes in support of his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment in the nature of a substitute makes clarifying changes to the bill. In addition to clarifying the intent of the bill, it includes language that ensures that sports medicine professionals treating high school athletes would be included in the bill's protections, which was always our intent. Finally, the amendment redefines the scope of professionals who are covered under the bill. I encourage my colleagues to support the amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Chairman, I ask to strike the last word.
Chair recognizes ranking member, Mr. Green, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to take a moment to thank Representative Guthrie for working with us on H.R. 921 in such a bipartisan manner. Since we first discussed this bill last year, staff from both sides of the aisle worked diligently with stakeholders to address concerns. The AINS introduced today clarifies the intent of the bill and ensures that additional sports medicine professionals are covered. H.R. 921 is meant to address a specific issue, which is why I'm glad we're taking the time to tailor and strengthen the language. Medical license requirements are a state responsibility. While working on this bill, we were very careful not to encroach on state tort laws. I'm happy to support the bill before us today as it strikes a right balance and respects states' ability to regulate their own professionals. I encourage my colleagues to support the bill as amended, and I yield back my time.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Is there further discussion on the amendment? If there is no further discussion, the vote occurs on the amendment in the nature of a substitute. All those in favor shall signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Are there any other amendments to the bill? The question now occurs on forwarding H.R. 921 as amended to the full committee. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes have it, and the bill is agreed to. Without objection, the staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes to the legislation approved by the subcommittee today. So ordered. Without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.